just going to be recording the session. All right, so this is a presentation in the Office of Vice Chancellor for Research. This is about the checklist of investigator financial disclosure and FCOI training. And my name is Jacqueline Jancis. I'm the Director for Conflict of Interest. And we have some recent updates that we've made to the checklist. So if you are frequently using the checklist, you can check our website. There's a new checklist posted. What do we want to talk about today? What prompted us to change the checklist is that we had some questions about, I think, possibly some changes in the way the application is written and who has to be disclosed as senior key and how that gets looked at. So we looked at the regulation, and I want to remind everyone, because I think as we've had discussions with business managers, the thing that gets a little bit confusing is that there are many regulations and there are many documents out there about guidance, about what you need to do for the grant. And this is another regulation. This is the Public Health Services Regulation, Department of Health and Human Services, and it's applicable to any of the HHS, PHS, NIH, and agencies that have adopted this regulation. And so I just want to remind us that what we're focused on today is this Public Health Services Regulation on financial conflicts of interest. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at what this regulation requires us to do and not be focused on other things out there, because there's other guidance from like the SF 424, which probably has its own definitions of what different people and different roles are. So we want to make sure that what we are focused on is that we have an obligation for all awards prior to their execution to be in compliance with this regulation. So we have to have all conflicts of interest managed. And so what we're doing is we're going to say, let's focus on this regulation, and we're not focused on the other components that you may think of in your role as business managers or PIs, because there is a lot of information out there. There are many FAQs out there, but what we have to do is focus on the requirements of the regulation. So the university policy is where we enforce the regulations. So the university has an obligation to enforce the federal regulations, and we have to do that by bringing it through into our university policy. And so what the university says is that authority for our university policy comes from the federal regulation that I just showed you. Oops. Okay. So applicability. The institution has to submit proposals and receives the public health services funding by means of contract. And so the institution is the one who has to be compliant with the regulation. So we are the ones attesting the compliance to the regulation. Also, the investigators have to be compliant with what's required by the university policy and the regulations. So the university has to have a website where we notify the public that we are compliant with the public health services regulations, and that we put that through our policy, and we have to go through a process to educate the campus and the investigators on this compliance requirements. And I just put on there, it's not applicable to SBIR Phase 1, but we still collect disclosures. So the investigator, and this is the definition from our PHS regulations on financial conflict of interest, is an investigator is defined as the project director or principal investigator or any other person, and that's regardless of title or position, who is responsible for design, conduct, or reporting of the sponsored research or the proposed sponsored research, which may include, for example, collaborators or consultants. So I want to bring emphasis here too. This is really regardless of the title or position. And so we do get many questions, could Could a graduate student be an investigator? It really depends. I mean, could a technician be an investigator? The definition is very broad, and I think it was written very broadly on purpose by Congress. When they put together the rules for the federal regulations, they were not looking to make it very narrow. They were looking to make it a very broad application, although it is tied to the role of investigator. However, I know that we have different views about what is an investigator, but this is the definition of the regulation of an investigator. So that's project director, principal investigator, and any other person, regardless of title or position. And that's the person if they are responsible for design, conduct, or reporting of the research. And so does that include collaborators and consultants? And, we go back to that, yes, it could include our collaborators and consultants. And that, even if they're not from UIC, they could be external to the institution. They could be in another country. They could be anywhere. It doesn't matter who it is. But if they have that role that we just discussed, about investigator, which is responsible for design, conduct, or reporting of the research, then they're applicable to that federal regulation, and we have to ensure compliance for those individuals. So, so I just want to make sure that we are being sensitive to the broadness of the definition of investigator, and that we don't, rule out individuals because they have a certain title, like a graduate student or a trainee or a mentor. I mean, we can't rule out anyone because of their title or their position. We have to think about what responsibilities they have for the research, and that's design, conduct, or reporting. And we had an interesting question that came up with consultants recently, and somebody had a consultant on their project, but she thought that he had nothing to do with the research, but she was going to cite him as a study author and give him credit in the publication. And what we had to explain was that's part of the reporting obligation. And then when we found out was the individual is also the inventor of the technology that she's testing. She's going to be doing testing to validate this technology. He has a startup company. He's invested, according to his website, millions of dollars into this technology. So, we have to be concerned, and, we come to this question of what's the risk. And the risk is, if we define investigator too limited, we limit it just to the title and to the designation, oh, this is only principal investigator, or we're limiting only to key personnel, we run that risk that an unidentified financial conflict of interest can compromise the research enterprise. And, so that's a real concern for the institution as well. And, you think about it because, you may be doing a lot of work on the front end to help set up the award, to get things through the process, and you have your goal as a business manager to get the research through the institution, which is very important. However, we have to, from the compliance end, we have to think about other obligations that the institution has. And so I just want to talk about those as well. And these are compliance requirements from that public health services regulations. So the public health services regulation requires the institution to make all disclosures publicly accessible. So within 5 business days, if we get a written request for information about any individual's disclosure, we have to go through a process and provide a written response to that requester within 5 business days. So that's a real requirement on the institution, and it can be very burdensome, especially if we received many requests. I would say in the history of the 3 years that we've been doing the compliance with the federal regulation, we've received, I would say, about seven or so requests for public disclosures, and they can be very time consuming in the sense that someone goes in and they may request disclosures for every individual on the award. And then we have to go through a process of vetting, who is required to submit a disclosure. We have to go through a whole analysis of what disclosures required, who had a conflict of interest, if there was any conflict, was there anything to report to that individual. So those kind of things that the institution has a requirement to do can be very time consuming, and we have a very limited time frame to really turn this around and meet the requirements of the regulation. Also, there's review for noncompliance. If we, during the process of, say, looking at an IRB application, which happened here for someone here at UIC, an IRB application was submitted. They identified the person had a financial interest related to something in the research, and then it turned out that it was federally funded by NIH, and the person had not disclosed that financial interest. It can come from different avenues, not just from the grant application, but we can be alerted through different means that there is an investigator with a financial interest. When that situation happened, the other items that are on here, the retrospective review, we had to go through the process of determining noncompliance, which we had to bring to a full committee, and then we had to go through the process of retrospective review, which involved working with the dean of the college of that faculty member. We had to ask the dean to appoint a committee from the college, and that committee had to spend its time conducting review of the investigator's work, and that it's very time consuming because you have to go back to the initial period of when there would have been potential noncompliance. So I think this spanned like about a year and a half that they had to look at the work that was conducted and make an assessment of whether or not there was any bias based on the financial interest of the investigator. And then if there is bias, there needs to be mitigation reports. And if there are mitigation reports, they have to assess, really the risk to the institution, any questions about the integrity of the data, any questions about whether or not the project can continue, if it's salvageable. So those are things that we would have to report up to the funding agency. So throughout this whole process with the non-compliance review, we have to alert the funding agency. We have to send them our retrospective review. We have to tell them if we need to submit mitigation reports. And then the PHS and the HHS can inquire at any time and perform an audit of the COI process. They can perform an audit of any individuals or any awards. And they can impose special conditions or suspend funding and require other enforcement actions. We have had one situation here at UIC where the PHS called into question practices about the COI process and suspended a $4 million research project. So they aren't afraid of using it, and actually they're probably more concerned and would want to use it if it was a real issue that they were concerned about. And this was something that they were concerned about, and it caused a lot of issues on the back end, which included the fact that they suspended this person's enrollment process, and they put a stop to the award, so they couldn't pay their people who were paid off for the award during those. I think it was suspended for about 4 months. So they couldn't pay people. They were worried about losing people who were important to the process. They were allowed to continue to, to work with the already enrolled individuals, but they weren't allowed to enroll new subjects. This was really an imposition for the PI. He was really miffed about it, and not very happy about the reasons behind it. But he did have a financial interest, and I think as we do work with some really amazing people who have come up with inventions and have real potential for market, and as these things get closer to market, or as these things become more attractive to capital, venture capital, or to companies, there becomes real conflict of interest concerns, and the NIH does not want to find out that they were funding something that was biased, or that wasn't truly being done for scientific purposes, but was being done for financial incentive. So, there are major concerns about that, and so I urge you to be, diligent with the front end of disclosure and the compliance pieces, because on the back end there are just so many obstacles that if we do find that there's non-compliance, we have to go through a number of measures, and this is all publicly accessible. So the institution can we can always be FOIA'd because we've been FOIA'd, but we also have this other component that we have to disclose information publicly. So I think I am just reminding you of our website and our contact information. I'm just going to end the slideshow, and I'm going to go to our website and show you the new resources. All right. Mouse doesn't want to cooperate. Come on, mouse. All right, so on our website, we have posted some updates. So we've gone through and cleaned up the website in terms of our new process, and we've added to the FCOI. We've added all the links to the checklist now linked to our new checklist. There's an existing old checklist. You probably have something saved to your computer. We would still accept it unless we found that there were any problems or any inconsistencies, or if during the process you said, no, I really want to remove this individual as an investigator because they don't fulfill that investigator role of design, conduct, or reporting of the research, then you have to use our new checklist, so that way we can capture the process here. It looks very similar to our previous version of our checklist. It has the same columns. We were limited with space, so we took away the no column for the training and the disclosure sections. Basically, if somebody's an investigator, they have to do the training, they have to do the SFI disclosure. We always send it back to you anyways if these things are checked no. So that's what we would do anyhow. So there wasn't really the need for that on the form. We still have the question here if there's a related SFI, but now we're adding another column here in order for you to be able to say this person's not an investigator, it's not a project director, and this person is not responsible for design, conduct, or reporting of the research. The same information is below, but we have added some information about this number 5, which is indicating if you check the not an investigator, that because they don't do the design, conduct, or reporting of the research, and that includes authorship, then you can check that no, And then that person, it does not have to do the training and the disclosure. It's not required when that is checked no. Someone asked me if email is required. It's probably really up to you. I don't think we would have to have it, but I do think we have to have the name. What we want is for you to fill in the names of anyone who's in your senior key section, and through that process, you can assess whether or not that person is not an investigator and indicate that. I just want to use caution and say it's easier to do the compliance than it is, with the training and the disclosure than it is to do the retrospective review or to have to go through non-compliance and analysis. So, I think really take caution before you decide that this person is not an investigator. The process of going through compliance is, a PowerPoint presentation with a little quiz at the end and a disclosure form, which you have to update annually. So I think, cost benefit, at the end, if you had to go through the retrospective review process and you had to go through the whole process of involving your dean and your college and your peers and your colleagues, I don't think the person who went through that here at UIC was very pleased that she had to go through that process. I think that was something she, felt like, it was a little bit embarrassing to have to go through that because she failed to submit her disclosure, which we would have identified and put a management plan in place, at the front end of it. But we didn't know, so we can't put a management plan in place if somebody doesn't have their disclosure submitted to us. So as a reminder, nothing has really changed, but this is the main change here is that you can designate that someone is not an investigator. And we have gone and updated the FAQs on our site. And mostly the one that changed was the FAQ number 7 about investigator. So again, the emphasis is that, don't just focus on what role, you're calling this person an investigator so that that's the only person who's an investigator. The definition of the PHS, 2011 Regulation on Financial Conflict of Interest is much broader than just the word investigator. It includes anyone responsible for design, conduct, and reporting of the research, and that could include a collaborator or consultant. And then we've provided some additional guidance. You really want to think about the role that person has and make sure you're not stuck on the title or the designation of that role, but really on the function of what does that person do in the research. And then additional guidance is here, could that be a collaborator or consultant? And yes, that's the same as the FAQs for NIH. They say the same thing if that person is, an investigator based on that design, conduct, or reporting obligation. And so, we do have the process whereby, if somebody's covered under a subcontract agreement, they would be covered by their institution if their institution had a policy that was compliant with federal regulations. If they are consultant or collaborator, but they're not under any kind of subcontract agreement, they're really doing that on their own free decision to do that. They're not doing it. They might be associated with another university, but they're really doing it as an independent consultant. And so they would need to be in compliance with the University of Illinois' policy on conflict of commitment and interest and do our disclosure and training process. And then, again, these are reiterated in the FCOI FAQs for NIH, but, could a postdoc, could a graduate student, it really, again, don't focus on what their title is or who they are. I think that this regulation doesn't say anyone is too small to be potentially unaffected by the regulation or not applicable to them. You really need to think about what role that individual serves in the study and in the research. And if it's related to design, conduct, or reporting of the research, then, if that person has responsibilities for those things, then you need to consider them to be an investigator, and they need to do the compliance component. All right, so so that was really everything I think I needed to get out here. I don't think I changed much other than you know, to say that senior key really, you know, we are still obligated to have public disclosure for senior key, but I think we would focus on whether or not the person was determined to be an investigator. And anyone who's senior key does not necessarily make them an investigator, but that, you know, we are looking at individuals who are senior key based on your list, and then you have the checklist option now to indicate that those people are not investigators because their role does not require them to be involved in design conduct or reporting. All right, so I'm going to open up, well, let me see if there's any questions or any questions typed in, but we still have about 15 people here. If anyone has a question, I'll open up the microphone so that way you can ask your questions. If not, or you want to ask a question offline, feel free to call me or to send an email, or Scott's also available. But you know, if you have a question that's related to this, it's probably good to have a chat with me. So if anyone has any additional questions, we will attend the ORS chat session. I think it's on November 19th, and that will be, I'm not sure of the location, but I'm sure they'll be announcing that chat session for the West Campus. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask. All right, since I don't hear anybody with questions right now, and I don't see any additional chat questions, I will end the training session. I feel, oops, there is a question. Okay, oh, it's a long question. Okay, in previous email to somebody, you mentioned that a paid consultant does not necessarily need to be listed as a senior personnel. But in your slide, the consultant or collaborator needs to be listed if they meet the definition of investigator. When does the consultant or collaborator become an investigator? If they're conducting research or reporting, but if they provide data for research, it's not considered as conducting or reporting research. So the collaborator or consultant, if they were listed in your senior key personnel list, then we would expect you to list them here. And if they don't meet the definition of investigator because they're not responsible for design conduct or reporting, then you can indicate they're not an investigator. And that's the end for that person. But if we look at the process and we do our review, so you submit this to us and then we go into the application and we look at your list of key, senior key, and we look at what you've put down in descriptions about the individuals. And if we find information that leads us to think that the person may have a responsibility for design conduct or reporting, then we will come back to you and ask for clarification about that person's role in the research. So, you know, I think that it depends really what you want that consultant or collaborator to do, and depending on what you're going to be doing with, you know, with that person, they may not be involved in design conduct or reporting, and you can indicate they're not an investigator. However, you know, we have worked with other individuals who said, you know, the consultant or collaborator is going to be named, you know, study author, and that's somebody that you would need to do the compliance component with. All right. So if there are any other questions or any other questions or concerns or any other topics you'd like to discuss? All right. Okay, our resources again are all posted on our website. Our contact information is on our website. If you have questions throughout the process, feel free to give us a call. We will be doing the ORS chat session. Will be there so that we can answer any other questions you have as you start using the new form. New forms on our website, all links and everything that we have on our email, so I'll link to this new checklist. Thank you. Thanks to everyone for attending today, and have a great day. Ending the meeting.